Hi, I'm Josh, and I'm so grateful you've chosen to spend a bit of time with me as I talk about the board games that I played in the month of May. Now, May was a bit of a rough month personally, and that's kind of reflected in the total number of games I got played throughout the month of May. So I was dealing with the ongoing financial difficulties of not having a tenant in my basement apartment. The bills were quickly piling up as I also prepared the apartment as best I could for a tenant and then tried to find a renter to take the apartment. Ultimately, the good news is that as of mid-June, I do have somebody living there. I'm finally getting that much needed rental income and am able to finally start catching up on some of those bills that were piling up over the past 2.5 months. But even worse, I found out that both my kids have been dealing with sort of long-term bullying issues at school to the point where I had to pull one of my kids out of school for the final month. And both of them, as a result, have been dealing with some very severe anxiety and other mental health issues that we've been trying to work through as well. So there's been a lot of challenges there, and all of that kind of amounted to less game playing time in the month. I did play a total of 8 games, which isn't too bad overall. As usual, I'll go over these games from my lowest rated game of the bunch to my highest rated. Let's get right into it. The first game I'll mention is a game called Dungeon Mayhem, which I have at least one, I think possibly 2 expansions for, and I ended up playing it with my older son Evan as well as one of his neighborhood friends here. So the 3 of us knocked off a few games of Dungeon Mayhem. You can think of this one as a very light Magic the Gathering, where each player plays a different fantasy character who starts at 10 health, and you're playing cards each turn to either attack your opponents or protect yourself and ultimately try to get your opponents down to 0 life before you do. What's really cool about it is that each of the characters you play has its own individual deck of cards, and they all play very asymmetrically. They each have their own strengths and weaknesses, and each one has special powers that are unique to that particular character. So it is fun to explore each deck and see how it plays against the other ones. My kids definitely enjoy it a lot. I rate it a solid 6 out of 10, although I'm sure my kids would rate it much higher than that. It's definitely a fun game to play with them, but I wouldn't necessarily pull it out with my adult gaming friends. Next up is a game I found on the website Board Game Arena. I've been looking around a bit at that site. I haven't been poking around there much in recent years, and I'm just super impressed with the huge assortment of board games they have available to play on that site now. I just wish I had somebody to play games with me there. If you are interested at all, my username on BGA is Time Bomb, so feel free to look me up. I keep a list of games that are marked as my favorites, which are games that I've either played in the past and enjoyed, or they're games that I'm interested in trying out, although I've never played them before. So there's a whole bunch of titles there that I would love to play. There are a handful that you can play solo, so I've dabbled, like I said in a previous month, with the game Hardback and played that solo on BGA. This month I tried a game called Spots, which is essentially a very simple push your luck dice rolling game, and I discovered that I really enjoy playing a game called Can't Stop, which is another push your luck based dice rolling game. And with Spots, it has this kind of cute little theme of dogs. You're trying to roll dice to match the spots on the dogs and trying to push your luck to achieve a victory before the computer opponent can do so. And it was, just a straightforward, fun little diversion. I rate the game 6 out of 10. I don't think I necessarily go out and seek this one out to purchase in physical form, but it was kind of fun to play online. Next is a game that I've played quite a few times in the distant past, and this is a game called Finca, although this time around I played it with its expansion, which is called El Razul, and I haven't played with the expansion parts before. So Finca is, I would say, a fairly lightweight Euro-style game. Essentially, you're moving your little farmer pieces around this rondel, which allows you to collect fruits and then spend your fruits to purchase tiles off the board, which gives you victory points ultimately. It's a very straightforward game, and it is very much, I think, in the same kind of category as a game like Azul, which is another fairly simple, mostly themeless game that does have kind of pretty components. The version I played was Paul's version. I guess he had kickstarted it some time ago, and the components were absolutely gorgeous. These nice big colorful tiles, great big wooden pieces. It came with the Al Razul expansion, which I do have to say that the expansion adds in several little elements to the game, and I found most of them to be kind of generally a net negative to the game. I found that they made the game actually a little bit worse, although there are a couple of elements of the expansion that I would leave in, one of them being the replacement piece on the sort of rondel windmill type of thing. I felt that was an interesting addition. But for the most part, I found the Al Razul expansion generally made things a little bit worse rather than better. It's a fun little game. I rated it 7 out of 10. Paul rated it 8 out of 10. And it was nice to get back to that old game that I've played in the past. The next game I played 2-player with Paul was Champions of Midgard, along with the excellent Valhalla expansion. I've talked about this game in previous months, so I won't dive into it in too much depth here. It's essentially a great big worker placement game where you're playing as Vikings, trying to collect all the stuff you need to go out on raids and go attack monsters and get points out of it. The Valhalla expansion makes the game so much better, like I've mentioned previously. And in this particular game we played, we were only separated by 4 points at the end of the game. And I will say the Valhalla expansion does allow you to get more points, so scores are pretty big, and yet despite the fact that there are all these scoring opportunities, Paul managed to just narrowly squeak out a victory of 4 points. Although I did keep forgetting my own Viking special ability, but at most that would have given me 1 or 2 more points and Paul still would have eked out the victory there. So it's kind of cool that a big game like that came down to such a tight score in the end. I rate Champions of Midgard 7.5 out of 10 with the Valhalla expansion, and Paul rates it 8 out of 10, so it's definitely a very good game. Just before I get to the top 4 games of the month, let me just take a second to send out a huge thank you to the people that make it possible for me to keep grinding away and putting out videos, and that is my Patreon supporters. I was so delighted to see that Mojodam came on board as a Patreon supporter again after dealing with some personal issues of his own, so a big thank you to my Patreon supporters, Abe O, Saver Girl, Mojodam, Joanna, and King Booty, and most of all to my highest tier supporter, Osmandus Perfect. You know your support means the world to me, and I appreciate you so much. So back to the games. We have another game that was new to me that I played on my computer, and that is Raiders of the North Sea, which I found its price marked down on Steam, so I purchased the Steam version of this game and gave it a try, and it reminded me so much of Champions of Midgard. I'm sure that the designers of Raiders of the North Sea took a lot of inspiration from Midgard, because it is another Viking-themed game where you're doing worker placement to collect crew and resources to then send them out on raids to gain victory points, all which are the exact same format as Champions of Midgard. So I think that one difference is there's maybe just a tiny bit less luck element in the way that Raiders of the North Sea plays out. It's really hard for me to decide which of these two games I like better because they're so similar. Although one thing I will say is that I do like the artwork in Champions of Midgard a little bit better. I find that the artist of Raiders of the North Sea, the Mikko, I love his building art. Like in a game like Villages of Valyria that has all these amazing buildings, I just loved his art in that game. But his character art I just don't like at all. I find it very off-putting. So with Raiders of the North Sea, that is centered a lot around these Viking characters that you acquire to your crew, I just find the artwork a little bit off-putting, just in terms of my personal, very subjective opinion. Of course, the Mikko is a hugely popular artist in the board game world, and a lot of people adore his artwork. So that's just my point of view. Just this weird kind of dichotomy between loving his building and his background artwork, but not enjoying his character artwork. Ultimately, I do give the game the same rating as I rate Champions of Midgard, which is a 7.5 out of 10. I'd probably have to play it again to see just which one I would rank above the other, because I'm not quite sure after just one play what would be the case there. Our next 2-player experience was one of my favorite racing games, and that is the Quest for El Dorado, which I play with a couple of elements of the Heroes and Hexes expansion, as well as the Golden Temples expansion. And in this case, I ended up making a very long and winding map for us to kind of race to the gems, grab the gems, and take them back to the temple, which you do with the Golden Temples expansion. And I kind of stumbled into this deck thinning strategy where a couple of the cards I acquired allowed me to trash cards out of my hand and get down to a nice, small, very efficient deck. And that, in combination with the fact that it was a really long course that I had made, meant that the strategy employed was just kind of a little bit overpowered, because once I had kind of thinned my deck down to just my powerful cards, it felt like almost every turn or every other turn I was going through my entire deck and just racing through the course. Though that being said, Paul did do a great job of keeping up to me right until the very end, so it wasn't a total blowout, but certainly the last few turns I felt like there wasn't much chance of Paul kind of passing me to get the win there. So just one little warning, if you do make a very long map, that I guess things like this can happen, where you might end up with a runaway leader type situation as opposed to making more of a standard size map. In any case, I really enjoy this game a lot. Between the racing aspect and the fact that it's built around this deck building mechanism, it just works so well and is not too complicated at all. I rate the game 8.5 out of 10. Paul rates it 7.5 out of 10. And even though I do love the game that much, this new edition that they're coming out with is probably not something I'm going to invest in. Sometimes when second editions of games are released that kind of improve on the game a little bit, I'll very often sell my old version of the game in order to purchase a new one. In this case, it's kind of weird that they have completely redone the artwork of the game so that any expansions they release will not be compatible with the old version, but I'm pretty happy with the expansions I do have for the game. I'm not sure that there's much else that I'd want to add to it to improve it, so for now I'm quite content with having the original copy of The Quest for El Dorado. So my top two games of the month are both games that I rate 9 out of 10, though I am going to, in this instance, talk about them in reverse order of how I rank them. Normally I would save my highest ranked game to talk about to the very end, but in this instance, because this is kind of a newish game to me, I'm going to have the most to say about it, I'm going to save it till last, and instead I'll talk about what is my highest ranked game of the month, and that is Spirit Island. Paul and I just keep coming back to this amazing cooperative game, trying new spirits and abilities, and just continuing to have fun with the game. In this case, we won a fear victory, so we were able to generate a ton of fear and get through that fear deck and knock off a victory that way. Next time around, I think we're interested in maybe trying a scenario for the first time, so that should be kind of fun to try as a first-time experience after all these plays of just kind of the standard game, along with, I should mention, the Branch and Claw, I think is what it's called. Anyways, we do play with that expansion all the time, and I should mention that too, because I think that expansion really does make the game better. In addition to the spirits it adds these other elements that I think overall make the game a little bit easier and just more interesting in general. So like I said, I rate Spirit Island with its expansions 9 out of 10. Paul rates it 8.5 out of 10, and both of us just keep coming back to this one because it's so good. Now, the true star of the month, though, is a game that I've owned for a long time. I've dabbled with in the distant past, but I was so excited to get it back to the table because Paul had requested it, and this is Battles of Westeros. So I did spend a few minutes talking about this particular game in my monthly contribution to a board gaming channel called Don't Be Bored here on YouTube. It's run by a fellow named Ollie, and once a month me and other contributors contribute a 2 to 3 minute clip talking about our favorite game from the previous month. So definitely check out Don't Be Bored, and if you want to go back and see me dive more into depth about my favorite games of each month, check out his Best of the Month series. And while I'm on the topic, I'll also mention that I contribute a weekly segment to the Dice Tower to their Favorite Game Friday video. So once a week I just submit a 20 to 30 second clip, and Roy from the Dice Tower comes up with a topic for the week, example deck building as one random example, and then all the contributors just talk for 20 to 30 seconds about a game that they think for them best fits with the topic of the week. So those are two things that I contribute to on a regular basis. If you want to check me out in those spaces, with the Dice Tower is their Favorite Game Friday, weekly Friday episode, and then with Don't Be Bored, it's their Best of the Month that comes out early in the month, talking about the previous month's games. So anyways, instead of repeating what I said on Ollie's Don't Be Bored channel, let me insert the clip here of me talking about Battles of Westeros so that you can get my kind of overall history with this game and game system, and then I'll talk about it a little bit more in a second. So here's what I said for that Game of the Month video. Hi, I'm Josh from the YouTube channel Josh Yaks, and my game of the month for May is going to be Battles of Westeros. Now, going all the way back to 2003, when I started to get back into the modern board gaming hobby, one of the very first campaign-style games that I started to get into was a game called Battle Cry. This turns out to be the first game in a family of games that ended up being called the Commands and Colors series. And after Battle Cry, Memoir 44 came out. I played a friend's copy a couple of times and enjoyed that, but then the original edition of Battlelore was released and I immediately picked that up. I was really into the historical 100 Years War aspect of that game, not so much into the fantasy side of it, but I got really into Battlelore, picked up all the historical stuff that I could get hold of, played it a whole bunch, and then going on down the road a few more years, eventually Battles of Westeros was released. By the time I ended up looking into it, however, it was already a dead system, and so basically all the Battles of Westeros stuff was on really crazy clearance prices, so I ultimately ended up picking up everything that is available for the Battle of Westeros series, and this was even before I knew anything about the whole Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire stuff. I never read the books, and even though this should have really been, in my opinion, the pinnacle of the Commands and Colors games, I think one reason it fizzled out was it was originally released in 2010, a full year before the TV show came on the air in 2011. So although they did continue to release expansions throughout 2011 and 2012 for the game, it hit the market before the whole series really took off in the public sphere. Another thing I think that hurt it was the typically terrible Fantasy Flight rule books. In fact, if you play the game, you really need to go to the files on BGG and download the completely rewritten rulebook that was rewritten by a fan of the game, which I helped to edit a little bit back when he was writing it, and it really helps to make the gameplay easier and clear up a lot of little issues. The final thing that made it, I guess, less approachable on a large scale is the fact that it is definitely a step up in complexity in comparison to the previous Commands and Colors games. The one thing I think that really made them popular was the simplicity and the approachability of the systems. Battles of Westeros takes that up a notch and adds some more complexity, but that's ultimately what made me settle on this particular game in the series as the one that I wanted to stick with. Yeah, you're still playing cards to maneuver your troops on the board and chucking lots of dice to see what happens, but there is a lot of really interesting tactical stuff going on behind the scenes now, and it's a game I enjoy quite a lot still. With the way my game tastes have naturally morphed and changed over the years, I'm not sure that I enjoy it quite as much as I did back in the day, but I've been very excited to finally get it back to the table again after quite a long time away from it, and it was definitely my highlight for the month of April. Cheers. So yeah, Battles of Westeros is a campaign that I've started a couple of different times with a couple of different people. I think I had started the campaign with Daryl Andrews, who you might know from some of his game designs like Sagrada and so forth. I think he was one that I had started playing through the campaign with, and I feel like at some point me and my ex-wife had maybe started into a couple of scenarios as well, but in any case those campaigns had sort of petered out and the game had been shelved again, and so here I am back into the campaign, back to scenario number 1, and Paul and I knocked off the first 2 scenarios over a 6-hour gaming session. So like I said, I think I really love this game still. It's a little bit hard when I'm thinking about games that I enjoyed a ton in the past. Like my former #1 game of all time was a game called Attack with the Attack Deluxe expansion, and I just don't really enjoy games like that anymore. I think it's not quite the same situation with Battles of Westeros. Even though it's kind of a move troops around and chuck dice to see what happens type of game, it is a very interesting system. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on with how the system works and how the games play out. And most importantly, the scenarios get very, very interesting as you start to work your way through the campaign. So spoiler alert for next month, I am going to be talking about this game again in the future, and some of those scenarios that we've played and that are coming up for us to play soon look super interesting. So I really like how the scenarios are designed. I'm rating Battles of Westeros a 9 out of 10. Paul has given it a 7.5 out of 10, which is interesting because he's a little more into the source material, the actual Game of Thrones show and stuff, and maybe a little bit less into the game, whereas I'm less interested in the source material, but very interested in the game itself. So the point is, I guess, as a whole, we both enjoy this sort of thing, and I am looking forward to continuing to get through this campaign. And that's my month of May. Please take a second to let me know what's been going on in your board gaming world. Have you picked up any new games recently? Are there any new releases coming up that you're excited about? Or is there just a game that you've been playing lately that you've enjoyed a lot? No matter what it is, I am very interested in hearing about it and chatting with you about it in the comments. I gotta ask you to do all the standard YouTube stuff. Go ahead and give me a thumbs up if you like this video, or a thumbs down if you didn't like it. Let me know if there's something you didn't like about it. And I'm slowly crawling up towards that 1,000 subscriber level, so please do subscribe if you haven't already. I'd appreciate that a lot. In any case, just you being here with me watching my videos means a ton to me and does support me in ways that I truly appreciate. So thank you, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Cheers. As I talk about the games that I played in May. The game grinding away and putting all video out in my month three? And then all contributors, and I'm slowly crawling, and I look forward to talking to you, and I look forward to talking to you